Welcome to Shadowproof. Evidence first, noise last.
In the West, there is a female figure that occasionally appears in various paintings. Her name is Mary, and because she comes from a place called Mount Allah in the Middle region. In what is now Eastern Israel, she is also known as Mary Magdalene. In the West, many people share the same name, so they often use the person's name plus a place name to distinguish them. Mary was a common name for Jewish women during the time Jesus lived. Jesus' mother was also Mary, and in the New Testament, there is another Mary from Bethany. In many Christian paintings, Mary Magdalene is depicted as kneeling before Jesus and begging for redemption. For thousands of years, people have been certain that Mary was a woman of the world. She knelt before Jesus, washed his feet with her tears, dried them with her hair, and anointed his feet with perfume, and now Jesus has redeemed her. Jesus was later persecuted by the Jewish authorities, crucified on a cross, and resurrected 3 days later. It was this Mary Magdalene who was the first to witness Jesus' resurrection and inform the other disciples. Since the 1950s, the impression that Mary was a prostitute has begun to be questioned. This impression may not have been true from the start. In the spring of 1955, an Dutch scholar boarded a plane to Zurich. He was Charles Quixno, a professor of history. From now on, we will call him Jill. The main purpose of Jill's trip was to visit the Dental Institute in Zurich to search for ancient relics. Because the institute had just purchased a handwritten papyrus manuscript written in ancient Akkad from a New York auction house. The manuscript was discovered in the 1940s in a small town called Nag Hammadi in Upper Akkad, which is the upper reaches of the Nile. According to the auction house's appraisal, the handwritten manuscript is about 1,700 years. Therefore, Jill, who was fascinated by ancient Akkad culture, eagerly rushed to Zurich, wanting to quickly see those handwritten manuscripts. As soon as he got off the plane, Jill went straight to the Dental Institute. The institute manager, who was worried about having no researchers, was delighted at it. It was a stroke of luck, and the two parties immediately began collaborating. The institute promptly showed the manuscript to Jill, and even provided him with each page of the manuscript to take back for research. After returning to the hotel, looking at the photos the institute gave him, Jill was overjoyed. The manuscript was written in an ancient Akkad language called. From around the 1st century AD, this language began to spread, and after the 16th century, it completely disappeared from Akkad. Coincidentally, Jill was an expert in Coptic, so he immediately started deciphering it. As soon as he deciphered the first line, Jill was stunned because its content was as follows. These words are the secret words of God, the secret words that Jesus spoke during his lifetime, recorded by the disciple Thomas. Jill was extremely astonished because these sentences are identical to the opening of the Gospel of Thomas, excavated in Greece in the 1890s. Could this Akkad handwritten manuscript be the Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas? So at this point, we need to introduce some basic background. The Old Testament we often refer to as the Hebrew Bible. As for the commonly recognized content of the New Testament, its main content is the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel. It also includes a book on the history of the early church, the Acts of the Apostles, 21 epistles of the Apostles, and a book of Revelation. The Old Testament refers to the covenant that Moses made with God, which was engraved on stone tablets and kept in the Ark of it. The New Testament is the covenant that Jesus made with his own blood to redeem humanity. It is engraved in the hearts of every believer. Of course, the New Testament is only a term used in the Christian world. Jews do not recognize it. To this day, Judaism still regards Jesus as one of the heretical figures among Jews around the 1st century AD. The Gospels were written after Jesus' death by his disciples, recalling his teachings and deeds during his ministry. The earliest written book is the Gospel of Mark, completed around 70 AD. Next to the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, completed around 80 to 90 AD. The last is the Gospel of John, which appeared around 100 AD. Although these 4 Gospels are attributed to 4 of Jesus' disciples, modern scholars believe it is unlikely they were written by their own hands. Because by the time they were written, Jesus had been dead for decades, and the earliest disciples were unlikely to have survived until the writing era and written them personally. So the process of writing the Gospels can be divided into 4 steps. First, oral transmission, and then alongside that oral transmission, some people began to record bits of it. The third stage is when someone wrote down the initial gospel, which is the first manuscript. Finally, someone compiled the documents from the three previous stages, understanding that before the gospels we see today. The scriptures record that all of Jesus' earthly disciples were male. The Last Supper. From left to right, they are Bartholomew, James, Andrew, Judas Iscariot, Peter, John, Jesus, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Philip, Matthew, Thaddeus, and Simon. Among these 12, 2 are named as authors of the Gospels, Matthew and John. In the manuscript currently being translated by Gill, another figure appears. It is said that the content of this handwritten manuscript is Thomas's recounting of what Jesus said during his life, and this, of course, made Gill both surprised and delighted. In the 19th century, a Greek version of the Gospel of Thomas was appeared. Unfortunately, it was an incomplete version. This Coptic version of the Gospel of Thomas is complete, 3 times longer than the Greek version. This is truly a major archaeological discovery. So why did the early Christian Gospels circulating in Europe appear on the banks of the Upper Nile? This must be credited to the rule of the Roman Empire. From the early years of the Common Era to the end of the 2nd century, the Romans firmly controlled the eastern Mediterranean world, including places like Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Syria, Turkey, and Greece today. Early Christian believers, following Jesus' teachings, needed to spread the Gospels. With the peace under Roman rule, the apostles could travel safely within the empire's territory. Naturally, their footsteps reached Egypt. Compared to the other 4 Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas is much shorter. The entire book has only 100. Joe worked diligently and finished translating it in just a few. However, after translating the entire book, a question arose in Joe's mind. No matter how many versions of the Gospels were circulating, sometimes a version appeared here, sometimes another was discovered elsewhere. So why were only 4 Gospels in the New Testament officially recognized by the Church? Joe decided to investigate thoroughly, and this investigation uncovered a mystery spanning thousands of years. Joe began investigating a large number of ancient documents excavated from various places around the world. He discovered that in the late 19th century in Egypt, an incomplete gospel was excavated, called the Gospel of Mary. He hurried to the Egyptian museum to verify, and indeed, it was also a gospel written in Coptic, and attributed to the author as the woman named Mary Magdalene we mentioned at the beginning. Here we also need to be careful, temporarily saying it is attributed, because what level of education Mary Magdalene had received, whether she was literate or not, is completely unknown. It is also entirely possible that she passed it down orally and later generations wrote it down and attributed it to her. Joe, very familiar with it, translated the entire Gospel of Mary, and this time his line was completely overturned, because the image of Mary in the book and the image of Mary as that prostitute were really too far apart. Judging from the content in the Gospel of Mary, Mary Magdalene was not only a disciple of Jesus, but even had greater insight than the great apostle Peter. Moreover, Mary was highly regarded by Jesus. The book records an incident like this. After Jesus' death, the disciples once gathered together, recalling and sharing the teachings of the Lord. The great apostle Peter asked Mary to share the content she had learned with everyone, and Mary did not hide anything, seeking out a series of teachings. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone present fell silent, because what Mary Magdalene said were things everyone had never known before. That is to say, Jesus cherished this great female disciple, he didn't cherish her a bit more. How could this be? Mary Magdalene was a character Jill had been familiar with since childhood. The typical image of Mary in European Catholicism is a repentant prostitute. How could such a person be transformed into Jesus' beloved disciple? With this doubt, Jill returned to Europe. He was determined to clarify the origins of Mary's image. This worldly woman must be given a proper. The result was indeed that he found the entire root of the matter. By the 6th century CE, Christianity had basically become the dominant religion. On the ruins of the Roman Empire, where many barbarian kingdoms were established, the process of conversion to Christianity was basically complete. However, in reality, there were not many believers who could read the Bible. This was because the Bible at that time was written in Latin. For the people of all regions in Europe at that time, Latin was not only a complex language, but also a foreign tongue. At that time, even the literacy rate among the nobility was not high. In that era, the ability to read and write Latin was entirely monopolized by the Church. We need to know that the first English translation of the Bible did not appear until the late 14th century. It can be inferred that hundreds of years earlier, when the English people heard the priest read the Bible, No one knew what the book the priest held in his hand was about. Another reason for the extremely low prevalence of books was that printing technology did not exist until the 15th century. Books before that were all handwritten, using parchment or goatskin to write on. They were few in number and expensive, unaffordable for ordinary people. Therefore, believers could only hear the contents of the Bible when priests preached. Interpretation of the Bible also determined everyone. After investigation, Joe believed that the confusion occurred in the year 591 AD. In that year's Easter sermon, Pope Gregory I mistakenly conflated Mary Magdalene with Mary of Bethany and another sinful woman mentioned in the scriptures. The three were mixed together as one. Pope Gregory I believed that Mary Magdalene was that sinful woman. In fact, even in the scriptures, that sinful woman was merely an unnamed figure, and her identity and specific sins were not clarified. But through the powerful dissemination by Pope Gregory I, who added sensational details, the notion that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute became widespread in Europe. Later, through painters, sculptors, and novelists, it was further exaggerated. The prostitute Mary thus became a highly popular subject in artistic works. Besides Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and John the Baptist, she became the most famous figure in Christianity. The origin of how the worldly woman Mary Magdalene was slandered is now clear. But Ryu still had a question. Was Mary, as the scriptures say, a beloved disciple of Jesus? Ryu turned again to the records in the Bible. What was the initial event that made Mary Magdalene a Christian believer? It was because Mary had been possessed by demons. After Jesus helped her expel 7 evil spirits, Mary Magdalene became a steadfast disciple of Jesus. Ryu also noted another issue. Previously, Mary often traveled with Jesus' 12 disciples to preach. Mary Magdalene and some other female disciples even funded the missionary activities. Thus, Ryu concluded, Mary was a woman of considerable means, unlikely to be forced into prostitution. As female disciples was akin to Peter. Therefore, she should have been an outstanding disciple of Jesus. Most importantly, when Jesus was crucified, aside from Roman soldiers, a few Jews and onlookers. Beside Jesus were only his mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and a few other women. All the male disciples were too afraid to show themselves. Then, a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea requested permission to bury Jesus and was granted it. Afterward, Jesus' mother, the Virgin Mary, along with Mary Magdalene, guarded the tomb because Jesus had told them he would rise again. 3 days later, when Jesus resurrected, it was Mary Magdalene who first witnessed the risen Jesus, becoming a witness to his resurrection. Jesus then instructed Mary Magdalene to inform the disciples that he had risen, making her the first person Jesus commissioned to spread the good news. Jesus' resurrection, representing victory over death and attaining eternity, is the true meaning of the gospel in Christianity. Thus, Mary Magdalene's special status lies in her being, so to speak, the first evangelist. Finally, Joe concluded that Mary Magdalene was an extremely important figure in early Christianity. It could be said that without Mary Magdalene, there would be no subsequent history of Christianity. She was a loyal follower of Jesus, witnessing his crucifixion, burial, and resurrection in full. Moreover, she was the one who announced the news of Jesus' resurrection to others. It could be said that she was the apostle among apostles. In early Christianity, an apostle typically referred to someone sent to convey information or entrusted with a mission. Apostle among apostles. At this point, Mr. Jill had understood the role of Mary Magdalene in early Christianity. If Peter was the main evangelist, this female disciple was no less significant. Her canonization was only now. Unfortunately, the confusion led a pope in the 6th century completely distorted Mary's image. This can be considered the greatest distortion of truth in Christian history since Jesus' resurrection. Moreover, this defamation lasted for over 1,300 years. In 1969, Pope Paul VI finally corrected the mistake of Gregory I, restoring Mary Magdalene's honor. Apostle of the Apostles. It is regrettable that Mr. Jill, who wanted to vindicate Mary Magdalene, could not live to see Pope Francis canonize her. Later, after decades of research and verification, archaeologists, historians, and biblical scholars all believe that the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas, which Mr. Jill was translated, may date back to the 2nd or 3rd century. They could have been compiled as early as around 80 to 90 AD, contemporaneous with the 4 Gospels in the New Testament. Scriptures like the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas ultimately were not selected for any canonical version of the Bible. Why is that? There are many reasons, with the main one being that early Christianity was struggling to survive under Roman Empire oppression. Like the characteristics of any secret organization, the early Christian church had to enforce strict discipline, pure faith, and strong internal cohesion to survive. Therefore, there could not be too many gospel versions, or else believers would argue over their differences, leading to internal division and collapse. From the latter half of the 2nd century AD, figures like Irenaeus, representing the early church fathers, initiated a heresy eradication movement, simplifying gospel versions, gradually shaping Christianity into a strictly hierarchical religious organization. History proved their thinking reasonable at the time, but the ideas and scriptures of other early Christian sects were thus deemed heretical. Under the Church's strict internal heresy suppression policies, heretical books were destroyed. The thoughts and scriptures of these sects gradually faded from the historical stage, so there was no place for them in the so-called church canon. And the so-called canonical Bible was also discussed and decided by bishops from various regions. Thus, the canons recognized by different sects also vary. For example, in the English-speaking world, the most common is the King James Version of the Bible, which includes the Catholic Bible, however, recognizes 73 canonical books. Essentially, this was all discussed and decided by the religious leaders and authoritative theologians of the time. Initially, when Jesus preached, there was no gender distinction among his disciples. Nor was there any hierarchy or class difference among them. But after the religion was organized, ranks in the church emerged. Internally, with positions like bishops and archbishops, the issue became complicated. Yet during Jesus' lifetime, there were female disciples among the apostles, and moreover, disciples he valued highly. Yet the religion acknowledged this, and in the important church positions later on, there should have been a place for women. But the society of that time did not allow it. Therefore, whether initially due to confusion or intentional distortion, Mary Magdalene being slandered as a prostitute can be considered one of the most helpless cases in history. Human history has always been like this. Truth and falsehood mixed, full of schemes and calculations. To watch the next videos, or if you have time, you can check out more videos from this channel.
If the proof convinced you, subscribe and open the next case.